Right, I am working on the spare tracks that get slung on the front of the Tiger here. So I've done these differently to the tracks that are actually on the tank in use. So a different colour. I've painted these in rust tracks, which is MiG 34, and you can see it's just got a slightly richer red tone to it, with a hint of orange, so it gives you that sort of track that's not been used sort of look. So next thing I want to do is just give them a bit of a wash. So I'm going to use a dark panel line wash for that. Quick and easy, isn't it? So we've got some. I think the plan is that we will have a set of 4 tracks for one side and a set of 3 for the other, and one of the tracks on the floor with a couple of pins. Make it look like something's being done. When you see the pictures of it, before she's captured, she's got more tracks on, and then after she's captured, she's down to 2 tracks for one side. So I'm guessing that the Russians were taking some out to have a look at them and understand them and that sort of stuff, and possibly some had been used as spares. This particular tank had had an observation team as it was of the first delivery batch that had come from Henschel, and so they were taking things apart and rebuilding them and see how things were being performed. So, they could have been messing around with training on track replacement and all sorts of stuff. So all I'm going to do is run some. When we put this in, it's going to be guide horn side that is being shown. So I'm going to focus on that and the top. So I'm not going to worry too much about this bit because you ain't going to see it. So best way of holding it is probably in some self-closing tweezers. So let me get some of those. Okay, so I'm just using some self-closing tweezers to hold them. It's just a good, easy way of doing that. And I think the one that's going to be on the floor will have the other way up, just because it looks a little bit more interesting that way. So let's just give this a good shake up. Of course, we will see these top surfaces, which is actually where this wash is going to collect the best. Okay, there we go. So the 3 is the 3D printed track, whereas the 4 is the plastic track. But painted up, you wouldn't tell them apart, to be honest. The plastic's just as good. Right, tracks are all painted up, and we've used it's called dark tracks or something. I think the paint's called. There you go. Yeah, dark tracks. MiG 35, which is a really nice colour match for the. They're like a magnesium alloy. The tracks, as I recall, and actually they scuff really easily. So it is important that on our little square pads we scuff them with a pencil or similar, or maybe a pencil, and then something a bit brighter as well. Because I'm showing this on a road, it would have been quite scuffed. But before we do that, I want to give everything a bit of a wash. I'm going to use panel accent colour. No, actually I'm not. I'm going to make my own wash because I need quite a lot of it. So let me make a wash. Right, I'm going to make a wash. We're going to use burnt umber, which is my sort of go-to colour for dirt. And put a lot in there. I always put too much in, always. And then we're going to add this, which is like a really sort of bluey grey colour. There we go. And you can mess around with this, and you could put some red oxide in to make it look a little rusty if you like. So there's our wash. So let's start. I'm actually doing it on the side that won't be facing people on the diorama first, so if it all goes horrifically wrong, the recovery is not so bad. And we're just going to put a little bit on the tracks here. Make sure we go down the full length. Right, the wash is drying on my tracks. So next thing I want to do is add a filter to the whole tank, and I'm using raw umber for that. This is an oil paint, so we're just going to put a little bit in. So I'm using a raw umber oil paint for this task, and I have a low odour thinner. It works the same as terps really, it's just doesn't smell, although I quite like the smell of terps. So initially I'm just going to thin it down, and it's easier to do that with a small amount of thinner, and just mush it up and work it. If you put too much in, then you have lumps floating around and you're chasing around. And that's about, was it 4 pipettes full? So you can see the ratio. I mean, it was a dab of umber to tons and tons of thinner really. Give that a good mix. I'm going to do the turret first. If you're not sure, it's always worth trying it out on a bit of sprue and seeing what it looks like, or if like me you have a little dummy model you can test things on. So give that a good mix up, and then put some on here and see what it looks like. There you go. Put some on this underside that's got no paint on. We'll see the pigment better a little bit. There you go. You see, it's just adding a very small hint. It's just a little. I mean, it's exactly what it is. It's a filter. It's just it ties everything in, and on places where you've got decals, it's gonna just tone it down ever so slightly. So that's the plan. So I'm gonna start with the turret, like I said, and we'll do the cupola first. And it's just one pass. If you do too many passes, then you're building up your pigment and it's becoming a wash. in the light you can see sort of a slightly browny yellow colour. Right, just some finishing touches on these tools and then we can start looking at attaching them to the tank. I've got quite a bit of work to do actually on the bolt cutters, but I'm using Tamir's panel line accent colour brown just to add a little bit of finishing touches to these tools. Now they've already had a wash in one colour, and what I want to do is just add a little bit of this oil brown just underneath the attachment point. It just adds a little bit of shadow and on the end there. Now you'll notice that I've tried to darken the axe so that we've got a different colour, which I think just adds a nice bit of variation. Making sure we do all three sides. And then on the shovel here, just going down quite heavy on that bit there. Just ties that into what else we've got on there. There we go. Nothing on the bolt cutter. And then we've got this box, which is going to be in amongst the diorama pieces. So to handle that, we're going to put a little bit of blue tack underneath, that's the bit that's not going to get seen really. And we'll use the accent colour just to pick out the wood grain. This is my favourite of the Tamiya accent colours. It has so many uses. Whereas the grey I find works great on things like white, and the black is a bit dark for a lot of things, so you need to only really use that on things that are already quite dark, like tank tracks and the like. Whereas the brown is great in cockpits as dirt. It brings out all sorts of things really nicely. Now I'm even going over the metal with it because it really doesn't matter. I'll just do the edges underneath, just in case there is any small visibility. Just check we've done it all the way around. Yep, okay, that's looking good. That looks a lot better already. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, and whilst we're doing that, we can do the jack block on the back of the tank. Right, starting to think about the build-up of snow on our diorama here. And we're going to start the process with tissue. So what we can do with tissue is where we want piles of snow, as in snow build-up perhaps on the roof. I'm thinking sliding down onto the gutter and places like that, and maybe around the edges of the buildings. We want some bulk snow, and we've only got a finite amount of snow product, so we need to help it out. And to do that, we're going to bulk it up with tissue. So the plan is that we will soak tissue and build it up where we want it, and then let it fully dry, and then we can apply snow effect on top and then do our wet effects around it. So the start of the process is to get our tissue wet, and then we can use that then to mould into shape, which is easy to do with some tweezers. So you can see as I was talking, I put my first bit of tissue, and it was 2 ply, so I've stripped it down to 1 ply, And you can see it becomes quite easy to work with once it's wet. So just going to wring it out, squeeze it with my fingers, get the excess out. We don't want loads of water all over our model really. But this is now, we can rip it, we can separate it, we can do what we want with it. I'm going to start by working in the gutter. So what I plan to have, the gutter is closer to the roof edge here than it is here. So I plan to have snow in the gutter and some snow going up the roof. So we'll use the snow effects on the roof, but we can just build the gutter up and pad it up with some paper. So I'm just pushing that in. There we go. And we can always remove it, you know, once it's dry, you can take it out, you can make it moist again so it's malleable again if you need to. And that's why I wasn't worried about my ejector pins in the top of the gutter, because you ain't gonna see them. So we have some gaps around the bottom of the buildings, and that is a diorama sin by any stretch of the imagination. So what I want to do is put a little bit of build up there now. Okay, so I've put my tissue paper in where I want it, and it's already looking a bit chilly on the old diorama. So that's in. It's probably still a little bit damp, but it has been drying for a little while now. So I feel I'm ready to start having a play with this Tamiya texture paint snow effect. See how we get on. I've got a couple of brushes. I've never used it before, so I don't know how it's going to behave. So I've got a couple of brushes. I'm going to start with fence posts. And then we'll start, once I get a feel for it, we'll start moving into other areas. So it's quite a grainy paint, and it says that once you've put it on, you've got time to manipulate it, so it has a slow drying time, and it's water based, so when you finish you can wash your brushes, but yeah. So I'm going to have a mess and see what happens. Now this in the top is a bit drier, so whereas the stuff in the actual jar, can't really see it with the light, is a bit wetter, but it's still, as you can see, paint isn't really what I describe it as. It's like sort of pre-made filler, really. So just messing it around with my brush, I'm already thinking I need something else as well. So maybe one of these paint stirrers, so I can shovel it and spoon it on and then manipulate it with the brush. Let's see how we get on anyway. So I know I want a bit of snow on there, so just want to see how it wipes on. Okay, that's interesting. It doesn't come off the brush particularly well. So I'm going to start with this fence post we want to just that was quite good actually. That's coming up. Actually not bad at all. Yeah, the little beads in it look really quite cool. Right, so I know you can't see this one, but I'll probably cut this bit out and jump to another bit. Well, that is looking quite effective. Now I want to show that the door is opened and possibly pushed the snow to one side, so I'm just going to use this razor blade as a hard edge, and then we'll push a little bit of the snow against it, take it away, and that should give us a nice straight edge to simulate that. So let's have a go. Okay, I have done the snow, well, on this side. I'm going to do some the other side of the fence as well, but I've done what I think I need to do at the front. I've got to say, the Tamiya Snow Effects product is really, really good. Really like it. It's really easy to work with and looks really authentic. So that's with our Tencon. And obviously there's no wet effects, which hopefully will enhance things. Let me bring you down a little bit and then you can have a look at it. Okay, with the snow finished, I've just gone round with some enamel gloss varnish, the Humbrol varnish, this one here. Where is it? There you go, gloss coat. And we've added some dampness around the snowy areas where it might be melting. So you can see on the roof there, I've done a little bit as well. What I've found is that the once it's dry, the Tamiya snow stuff takes varnish really nicely. Doesn't affect it at all. It looks really good. So I need all this to dry off now. Right, tank tracks have been painted in not rust tracks, dark track, I think it's called, and then we've metallized them using a pencil, as you've seen. So we're now in a position where we can do some finishing touches, really, to both the tracks and the tank as a whole. So I've got various products here that I may or may not use as we go through this. So I've got some various weathering pencils, gunmetal graphite, buff, streaking dirt, chipping colour, red primer, and light rust. May or may not use some or any of those. I've got Vallejo splash mud, which I think not likely to use, but I got it out just in case. I've got dark earth modelling pigment, which we will use. Nature Effects damp earth, which we're going to use. US modern vehicle wash, which we might use. I've got earth dry brush paint, so it's the same colour as the earth, ever so slightly lighter actually, the earth that we thinned down and used on the wheels, which I also want to use on the tracks. So we'll be definitely using that, possibly using that. And then I've got streaking rust effects, again, which we may or may not use. So various different things that we're going to look at just to add a little bit of interest to the final tank. So let's get going with that. So I'm going to start by putting down some earth, which we're going to heavily thin like we did before. That's going to just tie the tracks in with the wheels. So we'll just heavily thin it like we did before, and turn it into a wash, really. Okay, so all I'm going to do is give the tracks a little wash over, and let this just settle where it wants to settle, and that'll just give us a nice key in with the wheels is the idea. So if we do a little bit here on the bottom, you can see how that's going to then key in. So I'm going to get on with that, and I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. So we've finished putting the earth wash on the tracks, and what that does is not only does it make the tracks look used, but it breaks up the monotone colouring that we had, and allows the tracks to look a little bit more individual, because there are no two tracks there with the same level of wash on. So that's done. I'm quite happy with that. In fact, you could leave it at that, to be honest, but I'm not sure that I am yet. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to use this US modern vehicle wash, which basically is a sort of a browny green wash, just to pick out one or two little details on the upper surfaces, and help us have a little bit of definition on bolt heads and things like that. So that's my next job. Final thing that I want to do is use a little bit of pigment. So we've got some dark earth pigment here, and I just want to put a little bit of that on the track and the wheels. And it's really a case of just adding a little bit of further interest, breaking up what we've got on there. And the pigment dust, I'm not using a fixer, I'm just using it neat from the bottle. The pigment dust will just add another dimension to the colours that are in there and tie it all together a little bit. And we can put a little bit along the bottom edges, which will just soften the edges a little bit. Because there's no mud guards along here, we can imagine there's a collection of sort of dirt and mud and anything that the vehicle's travelled through is going to get thrown up here. And although they don't move particularly quickly, you'd be surprised how much gets chucked up there. So we can just soften that edge a little bit. Where we've got these hard blue lines breaking up the winter camouflage, it just helps blend them in and bring it all together. So I think it's going to look okay when done. I think this is the last thing we need to do to sort of make the bottom end of the vehicle all look naturally keyed together and not just different painted components, if you like. So you can see it's just adding a small amount of dust effect that fades it all together. So I'm going to carry on doing that, and then when I'm done, it's fitting tools, snorkel, turret. Right, one or two finishing touches that I want to do with the base before we put the tank on, and then we'll have one or two bits to do after the tank has gone up or as we build the tank up. So one of the things that I want to do is fill the buckets, and one of them I want to look a little bit dirty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill the buckets with this still water, which is fairly clear liquid. I have used it before for doing some streams and bits and pieces, and it's quite a nice product actually. But what I want to do is make it look a little bit mucky, and we're going to do that by putting some wet paint in and then pouring this on top, and hopefully that'll work out. I'm just going to decant a small amount. There you go, that'll be more than enough for our little bucket. It seems to have gone solid in the nozzle, but AK stuff does tend to go off quite a bit, I notice. Right, let's give that a mix. It's quite gloopy, as you can see. That looks too brown, so we are going to add another little colour to it. Just adding a little bit of blue-grey. At the end of the day, I want it to look like something's been wiped down, possibly something mechanical and what have you. So there you go. Got a browny, dark brown, slightly black. That looks a bit more like it. So let's get that in the bucket. There we go. Just needed a couple of drops, and I've got a bit just about to run down onto my diorama, which I don't really want, so let's try and get rid of that. There we go, got rid of that nicely. We'll just let that settle now into the bucket, and it will dry a nice glossy and look like we've got a bucket full of dirty water, which is what we're looking for. Now obviously with that one we don't want dirty water, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that differently. We're going to just dip the brush in to the product, and because it's nice and thick we can just drop a little bit in and build up how much we want in there, and that's a clear liquid and going to stay that way. So There we go, and we'll let that dry. Now, because this is quite thick, it's great for things like puddles. So here I want a little bit more build-up of liquid. It's self-leveling, so we can put it on fairly thickly, and it's fairly slow moving, so it will look like a puddle when we've done it. So there we go, and anywhere where we want a little bit of wetness. It's thicker than gloss varnish, so but it does have that sort of glistening effect. So if we want any pools of liquid from the melting snow and what have you, we can do that. But we can also paint with it, so we can show some dampness on the roof line where the snow might have gone, but the roof hasn't quite dried out. And that'll look quite nice. In fact, I'm going to do the same on the bottom bit here. And because it self-levels, all our brush strokes will disappear. Do have to be careful not to put too much on, because the weight of it, gravity will kick in and then you'll have drips, and you don't want that. Unless, of course, you absolutely do. So I'm going to go around and just add this in one or two places where I'd like to see a little bit of wetness coming through. And then I will get back to you when that is done. Right, next job is adding the spare track links to the front. So we've got them in two groups, a group of 4 and a group of 3, and they just push into this retaining bar that we glued on quite early on in the build. But there is a second bar that needs to go on just under this top row of guide horns here. So let's do that. Just need to find it. I've got it in here somewhere. There we go. So that will simply be located tight against the underside of that top row of guide horns. I just want to check the fit. There you go. So yeah, that looks okay, doesn't it? So we'll simply glue that in place. Okay, I think I'm happy that they are in. And they contrast really nicely with the red on that. We've got the snorkel to add on, which we could do at this point actually. We'll just see. Whilst we've got the glue out, we could add the snorkel on as well. So yeah, let's do that. Let's do that, I think. Because we're going to be using the same product, we're going to do a little bit of highlighting soon, so that'll be good. Right, let's get this glued in then. And then that's another element on, isn't it? Right. Put the glue on the inside so that we're pushing it in. There we go, that's the snorkel in place. Brilliant. So next thing, which we can do while this lot is drying, is just a little bit of a pin wash. And we're going to use Tamiya's black panel accent colour for that. It's going to stand up well against this, and then we've got a little bit of work to do to get them where I want them, but otherwise we are nearly there. So I'm just brushing it over the whole thing for now. Right, while we've got the black panel line wash drying on the top of the exhaust, which gives them a nice dark look, I'm using some streaking rust effects just to add some colour changes to the bottom of the exhausts. This is where they would have got a little bit wet and what have you. So I'm going to start with the underside, and I'm just dotting it on actually, as you can see. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to clean my brush up, get it all off, and then we'll just streak it a little bit. Which just sort of feathers it in unevenly, like so, and that becomes our second colour down. It's as simple as that. Right, my washers have dried on our exhaust system, so now I want to just dry brush the top there. Put the light on. Right, so I'm using the rusty track colour that we've got on the front of the vehicle, where we've got the spare track links, and we're just going to use that to highlight the top. I have a brush that I like to use for dry brushing, so we'll just dip that in the paint and get it all off as much as we can. Okay, that gives us a little bit of definition now. So next thing, we want to do a little bit of weathering powder. So I'm going to use, this is our Humbrol weathering powder in this instance, which is light rust. And this should be perfect for the very bottoms of the exhaust system, where you've got some heat collection and that sort of stuff, and then some dampness from the environment outside. So this is just a nice colour for that. So we'll just dip the brush in, give it a tap, and then we're just going to brush it along the bottom there. And I'm just trying to blend it in subtly. It's just about adding a little bit of variance. So you can see on this side here where we've been adding it, it's just making a small difference. And you just keep building it up until you've got the sort of the colour saturation that you want. Now we're also going to do some at the top, just very lightly going over the tops, just in the same way as we dry brush really, and it just highlights some bits and pieces, little bits of very light surface rust effectively. Okay, so that's our weathering powder done. What I want to do next is add a little bit of darkness, a bit of soot from the exhaust. Use a very dark grey for that. So this is a pastel chalk that we're using for this. And this is going to add a real nice smoky mattness to the exhaust here. And these engines weren't particularly fuel efficient, and we didn't half chuck out some fumes. We can allow ourselves a little bit of that around close proximity of the bodywork as well. And then I'm going to drag some down about half a centimetre or so down the exhaust. Okay, that looks quite grimy now, so I think we're there. What we don't want to do is overdo it. So there we have my finished exhausts. So we just need to put our covers on it now. Okay, so dip the end in the glue. Right, just hold that in place while it glues for a sec, I think. Then we can position the rest of it. So I just wanted to go through the colours for bolt cutter, because I see people getting the bolt cutter wrong. The most common two things that I see, two mistakes that I see, is that they make the handle wood, which is a mistake, and that the handle often stops here either before these two rings or at the top of the rings, and then the rest of it is metal, which is also wrong. So let me run through the bolt cutter, the colours and the materials, just so people are clear how it should be. So the bolt cutter head itself here is metal, and that goes down to this little arm here, which is part of the stop that stops the handle closing any further. So that is all metal. This ring here is wooden. The stop ring is wooden. Then from this point down, the handle is not melamine. It is wrapped in lots and lots of layers of very fine paper. I'm not sure whether it's paper that is in some way glued together and wrapped around, or there's some manufacturing process to it. But when you see old ones, you can see there's lots and lots of layers of paper that's flaked away. So it's paper covered around a thin steel or metal handle. So it's paper all the way down. The two rings here go over the paper, and they are made of wood. And then you have more layers of paper, which makes this thicker, until you get to this point here, and then the ends, these little caps here, are melamine. And in terms of colours, the melamine is a slightly richer red, like you can see here, and tends to be a bit glossier, whereas the handle is matter. It's supposed to be less slippy, obviously. So those are the materials. So the colours, I've used old wood for the 3 wooden rings, and then I've used red-brown base, which matches the sort of pinky red colour of the wrapped paper, which is often mistaken as being melamine, but it isn't. And then the melamine rings, I use RAL 8012, which is red-brown. In this instance, it's MIG 14 that I've used for this, and it's just about the right colour for the melamine for me and contrasts nicely with the handles. So this is what your bolt cutter should look like. Anything else, if it looks any different to that, then it's probably wrong. Anyway, that's my bolt cutter done, so I just need to mount it up. So there we have it, my diorama is done. So let's just talk about my thoughts now it's finished. So our diorama base with the 2 buildings is a complete mini art kit, and that went together really well. And if you've not used one of the mini art vac form kits before, they take a little bit of getting your head around. The plastic's different, behaves differently, but if you follow some of the things that we talked about, using the awl to cut it out and going through it, cleaning it up, it builds up really quite quickly and everything fits really quite nicely. You have plenty of options in the box usually, and joining the base together has caused no problems whatsoever. So I'm really happy with the diorama base, and I think that the kit is very, very nice. The figures are also mini art, and I love the expressions on their faces, and it all looks very natural. The poses are good. And they are phenomenal once they're painted up. Of course, the skill of the painter helps, so I think Gavin really did an excellent job of getting the best out of these figures that you could. There are 1 or 2 other bits on the diorama, resin parts and some drums from again mini art. The drums are a bit problematic. The rings on them, I think all of them broke, but they were easy enough to glue together once you got them in there, and it was a little bit frustrating that they were all oversized and needed thinning out. I think they engineered them wrong, but anyway, there you have it. The finished result is really quite nice. Now the tank, it's the RFM initial production early 1943, but actually that's incorrect. It's 1942, and that's just the start of a whole list of things that were incorrect with the kit. And when I say that, I don't mean the detail. The detail of the kit is lovely. The finished model is actually really nice, but it was an expensive model compared to other versions of the Tiger one that you can buy. And remember that the tracks, we bought the 3D printed aftermarket tracks, and we had to buy an upgrade set with photo etch and 3D printed, all made by RFM, and we'll come back to that in a minute. The main problem with the tank was this bottom hull piece, which was distorted, and where they'd moulded some of the fitting holes for the torsion bars and wheel fittings upside down, so you couldn't actually build the kit correctly, and that means one thing and one thing only: They did not check the engineering and test build this before they went to production. There were other bits. The photo etch, the engineering of the photo etch didn't work, and it made it much more difficult to put the photo etch together than other photo etch companies who approach it differently. So they cut these little slots in, and you had to slot it all together, and it just didn't fit. Bits were oversized, and the slots weren't long enough, and whereas they could have just folded it and it would have looked fine, or put a recess in for it to glue in. So the photo etch, again, hadn't been thought through properly. The idea was great, but the application wasn't. And the same with the 3D printed parts. We bought a set of 3D printed track, and on one side, 3/5 of the track links weren't usable because they hadn't been manufactured properly, and the pinholes were completely filled, so you couldn't put the pins through to hold it together. So that was 3 different RFM kits that all had issues in. And although people have reassured me that this is not typical and that RFM kits are usually very good, sorry, I won't buy one again, because this was sloppy. Now let's talk about the diorama then. Am I happy with how the dioramas come out? Yes, in the main. I'm never 100% happy. There's always something that you think, oh, I could have done that better, or maybe next time I'll do this. But my composition, I'm happy with. We've gone with, when you look at the kit that Mini Art give you that we've used for the base with the 2 buildings, they're the 2 buildings the same colour. Now I deliberately went for that one being a sort of a more whitewashed one, because I wanted to cool down the overall appearance of the diorama. So we were doing it in early winter. So this tank was the first tank actually captured by the Soviet Union, the first Tiger tank, I should say. And it was from the first manufacturing run, and it had a team of people with it. So it was constantly being stripped down to see how the tank was performing. We'd seen photographs of it in the winter camouflage, so that's how I wanted to go. So this is early winter. It's sort of September, so we've had a first snow. It's sort of melting back. The guys have got their tops off and their sleeves rolled up because they're doing some really hard, difficult work. And even though it's cold, they're not cold. They're quite warm because they're working hard. And that's how I excuse the fact that really they're probably more dressed for the summer than the winter. But it's sort of late autumn, early winter. So I think the composition works well. When you look at it face on, not as you're looking at it now, but when you look at it face on, first thing you're drawn to is the building. Because the building's white and cool, it gives you an impression that it's cold. You then come down to the figures, and the figures lead you to the tank, which is your main feature. Because the building behind it is yellow, that frames the whiteness of the tank, so the camouflage pops out and it's not lost in another white building. So I think that all works quite nicely. The 2 buildings being joined by the fence is a nice little touch. I think Mini Art did a good job of that, and we kept the fence a sort of greyed wood as well to keep everything nice and cool. There's a little bit of warmth in the road which helps that to stand out, and we did the pavement cobbles slightly different colour, so that we could clearly see where everything was. And when we were laying this out, we didn't know exactly where the snow was going to go, so that all worked nicely. Having the little areas of interest just helps when you finish looking at the tank, you're then going to roam around a little bit, and it gives you more things to discover and keeps the eye occupied as you roam around there. And we've deliberately put them in clumps near the figures, so that you can get a sense that there's something going on. So I think the figures really work well, that with the tank cleaning rod and everything, and that's all great. So the actual diorama has delivered what I wanted, and I'm happy with it. The Tamiya Snow product, which I'd not used before, is excellent. It's an outstanding product. I am really happy with how that snow has come out. I've had an attempt at doing some melted snow around it, and we found that this held varnish really well, and we put a little puddle in with some still water, which has added to the effect, and generally it's really capturing the feel that I was going for. So have I achieved what I was looking for? So overall, I am happy with it, other than the fact that I've just broken off my gas bottle. We'll put that back on in a sec. So I'm going to take some photographs now, and we'll play out and show you some different angles, and you can get a good view of the finished diorama. I hope you enjoyed watching this. This has not been a masterclass in how to build a diorama. It's been me building a diorama to celebrate 80 years of the Tiger tank, which is my favourite tank of all time. I think it was a game changer of a tank, even if it wasn't a war-winning weapon. So yeah, I'm happy with that. I've now just got to negotiate a place to display it. Thanks for looking in, enjoy the photographs, and I will see you very soon on the next build, which might well be the Gotha or the Queen Mary 2.